Susan Scott, in her book, Fierce Conversations, has a wonderful quote that says, "Marriages, families, teams, organizations, companies, even countries grow and die one conversation at a time." And when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Because everything we do in our personal life or in our professional life is run on communication. It is everything about everything. And to the degree that we have effective communication with people, we are going to be more effective in what it is that we're actually doing and in fulfilling our tasks or our mission when it comes to our companies or our families. So what happens, however, when we get involved with the communication with somebody else and there's conflict? This is when it gets tough. Conflict is like the Mount Everest of communication. And normally we do one or two things. Very primal. One, we either fight, meaning we get very aggressive, we try to dominate the other person, or two, we flight. We try to avoid, get out of it, try to gloss over the issue, pretend it isn't there. Either scenario is not effective in our exchange of communication and in building trust. So what do you do then if you are involved in a conflict? What I've noticed with organizations is that the degree to which conflict is managed effectively, trust either goes up or goes down, and productivity either goes up or goes down. So if we can manage and get good at managing conflict, the rest becomes a lot easier, and trust becomes a lot more prevalent. Innovation starts to take off, and engagement starts to really solidify. Three things that I want to speak with you about. What happens when you have a conflict with somebody else? Two, what happens if somebody else is trying to engage you in their conflict with another person? And three, what happens when somebody else has a conflict with you? Starting off with number one, ask yourself before you start getting engaged with somebody else around a conflict that you have with them, what role do you play in this, if any? Do you own any of the conflict? What part of it do you own? Remember, performance follows perception. So your perception of that other individual, your perception of yourself will have a direct connection to how you perform in that relationship. Go directly to them. You need to actually get engaged in a one-on-one. When you do, only one issue at a time. Don't overwhelm them with 4 or 5 things. Handle it, move on to the next. And then lastly, speak only for yourself. Do not bring other people into this conversation. It's between you and them. What happens if somebody else is trying to engage you in their conflict? Avoid it at all costs unless you can set some clear boundaries. Unless you can say, I will be a sounding board for you, but I'm not going to gossip, I'm not going to take sides, I'm going to be neutral. Make sure that your role as the third-party sounding board is simply to help that person get clarity about what it is that they're trying to understand about themselves and that other person. Your job, ultimately, if you decide to take this on, is to get them back into a conversation with the person with whom they have the conflict. This has to be confidential. You need to be very objective, and big time, do not share this with other people. This is where conflict becomes like a cancer, when third-party people get involved and it starts to spread. What happens when conflict is coming toward you? Most of the time we want to be defensive because we're not often prepared for it. Slow down, listen, acknowledge the other person's conflict. Acknowledgement does not mean acceptance. It just means you understand. Ask a lot of questions, get the full story. If it's appropriate, ask for permission to give them some sort of feedback about what you might think is going on here. And obviously, try to resolve for a win-win. Remember that any kind of conflict that you have with somebody else or they with you is often an unspoken request. So always try to drive for what is it that you want, or what is it that they want from you that will resolve the conflict.